She trusted the wrong person, and it cost her everything. A case filled with deception, faith, and betrayal. The evening before Halloween arrived in Midland, Michigan, bringing with it an unthinkable tragedy. A devoted mother disappeared from her residence, leaving behind no explanation. Her vehicle remained parked where she'd left it. Her personal belongings sat untouched in their usual spots. And her young child, just 3 years old, had been placed in the hands of someone who harbored unspeakable darkness. What started as a straightforward missing person investigation spiraled into a nightmare that revealed sinister truths concealed beneath religious devotion, community standing, and an approachable demeanor. This is the devastating true crime story of Rebecca Gay. Before we continue, like the video, subscribe for more real-life crime documentaries, and turn on notifications. Comment below and tell me where you're watching from. Now, let's continue. Midland, Michigan served as the hometown for Rebecca Jane Gay. Growing up as one of 4 children in her household, she demonstrated compassion and warmth from an early age. Her affection for creatures great and small drew her toward the equestrian program at Bullock Creek High School, where she discovered her passion. Mounted atop a horse, Rebecca found her calling. She possessed innate talent, and cruelty seemed completely foreign to her nature. Beyond her equestrian pursuits, she actively engaged in community service initiatives and fundraising campaigns throughout her school years and neighborhood. In every way, Rebecca embodied kindness, generosity, and ambition as she worked toward leaving a positive mark on the world around her. When Rebecca matured into young adulthood, her aspirations pointed toward the beauty sector. This career goal brought her to the In-Session School of Cosmetology, where she pursued professional training. Her future seemed promising and well-organized. However, an unexpected development altered her trajectory during this period. While involved romantically with an individual whose identity remains undisclosed to this day, Rebecca discovered she was expecting a child. She was 21 years old when she welcomed her son into the world, naming him Conway. The year was 2009 when this happened. Despite the unanticipated nature of this life-changing event, Rebecca embraced motherhood wholeheartedly. She developed an immediate and profound bond with her infant son, and nurturing him came remarkably naturally to her. Her youth posed challenges, certainly, but her family stood by her side throughout. Conway's upbringing involved both biological parents, though Rebecca and his father eventually ended their romantic involvement. Nevertheless, they managed their co-parenting arrangement as effectively as possible while maintaining completely independent lifestyles. Faith played a significant role in Rebecca's identity. She practiced Christianity with sincere dedication, maintaining nightly prayer rituals and attending worship services whenever circumstances allowed, among other religious practices. She acknowledged past missteps in her journey, without question. Yet she committed herself to spiritual renewal and strengthening her relationship with her faith, particularly given that a vulnerable child now relied upon her completely. The bond between Rebecca and Conway transcended the typical parent-child dynamic. They shared genuine friendship. Halloween stood as their mutual favorite celebration, and Rebecca dedicated every resource toward Conway's well-being, as he represented the center of her universe. Throughout this chapter of her life, Rebecca earned income as a hairstylist at a neighborhood salon. Additionally, she secured employment at the Mount Pleasant Goodwill location, where her performance earned her advancement to management. This promotion required her to step away from hairstyling, though Rebecca harbored no regrets about the transition. Her earnings enabled her to secure independent housing, specifically a mobile home situated within Broomfield Valley Trailer Park, positioned approximately 10 miles from her Mount Pleasant workplace. She led a modest existence, yet it fulfilled everything Rebecca desired, providing a secure environment for her small household. During this same time frame, Rebecca discovered romantic companionship as well. She began a relationship with a gentleman named Aaron. According to everyone who knew them, Aaron appeared to be an exceptional partner who welcomed both Rebecca and Conway unconditionally. Therefore, Rebecca had achieved a fulfilling existence. She maintained her own residence and her cherished little family unit. She enjoyed a loving relationship with a boyfriend who showed equal devotion to both her and her child. Furthermore, she held a fulfilling position where colleagues held her in high regard. To enhance matters further, Halloween approached rapidly on the Calendar. Rebecca's anticipation rivaled that of any child counting down to candy collection. From Rebecca's perspective, circumstances truly couldn't improve. She was essentially experiencing her ideal life. However, as we understand too well, beautiful dreams can transform into terrible nightmares without warning. Rebecca, along with her relatives, cherished memories of past Halloween celebrations because those occasions brought joy and amusement, centered around abundant confectionery treats. This particular Halloween season of 2012, however, would etch itself into the Gay family's consciousness as an agonizing recollection because it marked the permanent loss of Rebecca from their lives. October 30th, 2012, found Rebecca fully immersed in festive preparations. She adorned her living space with various Halloween-themed decorations and displays. Conway, who resembled his mother strikingly, could barely contain his excitement for his preferred annual tradition, gathering candy from neighbors. The following day's plan for October 31st looked straightforward. Rebecca's work shift occupied her morning hours, after which she intended to return home and help Conway into his costume before transporting him to his father's residence for the evening's festivities. Subsequently, she planned a quiet evening at her own place, likely enjoying horror films or similar entertainment. Heartbreakingly, Rebecca never arrived at her workplace on October 31st. Understanding Rebecca's character requires knowing her reputation for reliability and timeliness. Her managerial role demanded nothing less. Her tardiness or absence would reflect poorly on those under her supervision. Consequently, her co-workers found it deeply concerning when Rebecca failed to appear at goodwill. She had provided no advance notice regarding time off or any urgent situation preventing her attendance. Rebecca's unexplained absence troubled her colleagues sufficiently that they reached out to Erin for information. Several employees even drove to her address at Broomfield Valley Trailer Park. Their concern centered on the possibility that Rebecca required assistance but couldn't contact anyone. Upon arriving at the mobile home, however, the situation only grew more perplexing. Rebecca's automobile sat in its designated parking space. She apparently hadn't departed from the property, yet the residence appeared eerily silent. Her co-workers hypothesized that Rebecca might be severely unwell and in desperate need of medical intervention. When they ultimately managed entry into the dwelling, they encountered additional confounding circumstances. Every personal item belonging to Rebecca, encompassing her handbag, house keys, and billfold, remained positioned on the entryway table precisely where she'd placed them. Yet neither Rebecca nor Conway could be located anywhere. What destination could have drawn them away without her vehicle and essential belongings? The initial assumption among everyone present suggested perhaps Rebecca had traveled to Conway's paternal residence for his drop-off. But through what means? Her automobile remained conspicuously present at the scene. Consequently, faced with mounting questions and zero explanations, the Gay family contacted law enforcement to file reports for both 24-year-old Rebecca Gay and her 3-year-old child Conway as missing persons. Authorities didn't immediately mobilize a search operation for Rebecca. Their protocol involved waiting to determine whether Rebecca might reappear on her own. But once 20 hours elapsed without any sign of her, law enforcement began treating Rebecca's disappearance with considerably greater urgency. Meanwhile, someone had located Conway. Fortunately, he remained physically unharmed, having been discovered at his paternal residence. The question remained, however, regarding his method of arrival. The answer involved an individual named John, who had transported Conway to his father's home in preparation for Halloween activities. This naturally raises the question of John's identity and connection to the family. He wasn't unfamiliar to Rebecca or her relatives. In fact, he was preparing to become Rebecca's stepfather through marriage. You see, John Douglas White had entered into an engagement with Rebecca's mother, Sally Gay. Rebecca's parents had dissolved their marriage many years prior, and Sally had subsequently developed a romantic relationship with a widely respected local minister within the community, John White. John had also established close bonds with both Rebecca and Conway. He frequently provided childcare for Conway on numerous occasions, and he had specifically agreed to handle transportation duties for Conway on Halloween. His responsibility involved delivering a costume Conway to his paternal home for the evening's trick-or-treat activities. Relief swept through everyone upon learning Conway had been found safe and uninjured. However, Rebecca's whereabouts remained completely unknown. Where could she possibly have gone? Rebecca would never simply abandon everything, particularly her son. Her love for him exceeded all else. She would never desert him in such a manner. Law enforcement therefore faced substantial investigative work, though they were only beginning their efforts. Investigators chose to interview neighbors, individuals passing through the area, and those maintaining closest relationships with Rebecca. Their objective centered on gathering any information potentially leading toward answers and, ideally, locating her alive and well. Unfortunately, these inquiries yielded nothing of value. They also conducted an interview with John, though even this proved fruitless as a lead. While he was believed to be the final person present at Rebecca's residence, he wasn't necessarily under active suspicion at that moment. Law enforcement simply hoped to extract any observations or unusual details John might have witnessed during his time at Rebecca's home. According to John's initial account, he never actually laid eyes on Rebecca during his visit to collect Conway. This particular detail has never received thorough public clarification. Does this suggest Conway was unsupervised in the home, or does it merely indicate John didn't have direct visual contact with her? Perhaps he simply called her from another area of the residence. The truth remains unclear. Regardless, investigators also questioned Rebecca's present romantic partner, Aaron, along with Rebecca's former partner and Conway's biological father, yet both men were eliminated as suspects. Nothing emerged from these interrogations suggesting either Aaron or Conway's father bore any malicious involvement in Rebecca's vanishing. John, functioning in his capacity as a minister, as previously mentioned, offered prayers for Rebecca's protection and safe homecoming. Joined by the 14 congregants of their worship community, Sally found herself consumed by distress and nervousness regarding her daughter's fate. An exceptionally lengthy period had now passed since Rebecca's disappearance. Even assuming she had simply gone somewhere privately or needed space from the pressures of single parenthood, she certainly would have returned to safety long before now. One can only imagine the emotional turmoil 3-year-old Conway must have been experiencing. He had reached an age requiring constant maternal presence, yet she was nowhere to be located. The thoughts running through his developing mind are almost impossible to comprehend. Hope continued diminishing, and the situation appeared increasingly dire. Law enforcement persisted in questioning every individual who knew or had familiarity with Rebecca, yet they couldn't dismiss a particularly unsettling intuition. They sensed the perpetrator existed somewhere nearby, likely within the immediate community itself. Evidence suggested no outsider had abducted Rebecca. Therefore, their suspicions intensified dramatically when a certain individual began contradicting their previous statements. Can you identify who? It was the religious minister himself, the spiritual leader supposedly dedicated to righteousness and rejecting wickedness, John White. Investigators recognized something suspicious was occurring when he repeatedly altered his testimony. Recall that during the initial police interview regarding whether he encountered Rebecca, John firmly insisted he never saw Rebecca that particular morning. But subsequently, he reversed this claim, now stating he did in fact see Rebecca at her residence, but lacked knowledge of subsequent events because he departed with Conway immediately thereafter. Subsequently, investigators examined Rebecca's vehicle more thoroughly. The driver's position had been adjusted significantly backward, far beyond what someone of Rebecca's small stature would require. The adjustment appeared suitable for someone matching John's physical build. Was this merely coincidental or something more sinister? This discovery represented merely the beginning of what investigators would uncover because they delved deeper into John's history before his relocation to Midland, Michigan. The findings were far from pleasant and actually revealed something deeply disturbing and perverse. The minister, who projected an image of moral purity while delivering sermons about virtue and spiritual matters, represented the complete opposite of his public persona. He was concealing something profoundly dark and ungodly from the community members surrounding him, and before long, everything would be exposed. Information about John's early years remains limited, but he possessed a profoundly troubling aspect to his character that would emerge when he lost control over his compulsions. He harbored intense hostility toward women and maintained an unhealthy fixation on, individuals who had ceased living. This represents a peculiar fascination for anyone, but especially alarming for someone leading a congregation. Eventually, the truth emerged that during John's 20s, he faced arrest for attempting to end the life of a 17-year-old named Teresa. The incident unfolded when he deceived Teresa into descending into his residence's basement and attacked her while expressing deeply offensive statements about females. Through extraordinary fortune and against all odds, Teresa survived the brutal assault and immediately reported the crime to authorities, resulting in John's arrest. Yet he served merely 2 years behind bars before gaining release in 1983. 2 years for attempted murder, the situation worsens from there. Teresa naturally suffered severe psychological trauma and desperately needed to never encounter her attacker again. Yet that's precisely what transpired. During a shopping trip one afternoon, someone spoke Teresa's name from behind her position. She rotated to face the direction of the voice and confronted the absolute last person she ever wished to see again. John White. He displayed a smile toward Teresa, and the terror she must have experienced in that instant defies imagination. Mercifully, nothing physical occurred beyond this deeply troubling encounter. John appeared to simply derive satisfaction from a psychological power play, demonstrating to Teresa that he could appear unexpectedly at any moment. Thankfully, this incident never repeated itself, and he subsequently left her in peace. Following this chapter, John proceeded with an apparently normal existence. He concealed his criminal history, entered into marriage, and even became a parent to multiple children. Before long, however, his sinister impulses resurfaced with intensity, and he began seeking another target. His next victim would be 26-year-old Vicky Sue Wall. She happened to be John's coworker, and the two had engaged in an extramarital relationship. Because remember, John maintained a marriage while his wife carried their third child. Tragically, during July of 1994, Vicky disappeared without explanation, and investigators discovered her deceased remains multiple weeks afterward in an isolated section of Comstock Township within Michigan. Everyone immediately focused suspicion on John because Vicky's final confirmed sighting placed her at approximately 3 a.m. on July 11th, entering John's pickup truck. He represented literally the final person known to have seen her alive. Furthermore, John's behavior during police questioning only reinforced their suspicions rather than dispelling them. He demonstrated a lack of cooperation. He declined to submit to a polygraph examination and refused to assist with the investigative process. Investigators did recover DNA material from John's vehicle. Yet somehow this evidence was deemed insufficient, which forced the prosecution to extend John a plea arrangement. Ultimately, John received a guilty verdict and faced sentencing of 8 to 15 years of incarceration for ending Vicky's life, which represents an absolutely inadequate punishment. Yet his criminal activities hadn't concluded. While imprisoned for Vicky's murder, he revealed something deeply disturbing to a prison mental health professional. John acknowledged that he derived pleasure from ending women's lives. That admission alone represents profound depravity. However, he elaborated further, explaining that he developed romantic attachments to these women following their deaths. This constituted quite a shocking disclosure to the mental health professional, yet this information apparently never reached law enforcement officials. My strongest assumption suggests this information couldn't be shared due to some form of confidentiality regulations, though I cannot be completely certain about that given this occurred during the late 1990s or early 2000s. The majority of such regulations weren't established until multiple years following that time frame. Your interpretation carries equal validity to mine. Following all proceedings and outcomes, John's disturbing revelation remained protected by his psychologist's confidentiality. Subsequently, in 2007, John gained freedom after completing merely 12 years for taking Vicky's life. Upon release, John chose to relocate to Midland, Michigan, seeking a new beginning. More specifically, Isabella County became his destination. Nobody in that area possessed knowledge of his criminal background. He essentially received a clean slate. Speaking of new beginnings, John determined that following his release, he would dedicate his existence to religious service. While this represents, for numerous obvious reasons, a commendable decision to pursue, circumstances wouldn't prove quite so straightforward. John assumed leadership of Christ Community Fellowship Church located in Mount Pleasant, and he also purchased a mobile home within the Broomfield Valley Trailer Park. That community name should trigger recognition because it's the identical location where Rebecca established her residence. Additionally, a peculiar sequence of circumstances resulted in John developing a romantic relationship with Rebecca's mother, Sally, ultimately becoming engaged to her in 2012, shortly before Rebecca's disappearance. Consequently, Sally's complete family embraced John as a paternal presence, Rebecca included. Rebecca and John maintained a quite amicable relationship. As mentioned earlier, he would assist Rebecca by providing childcare services for Conway and handling his transportation to and from his paternal residence. For Rebecca, she felt genuine happiness finally having some form of reliable father figure present in her world. Despite having reached her 20s, she simply appreciated witnessing her mother's contentment and experiencing her family functioning like an authentic family unit once more. Throughout this entire period, John's sinister secret remained securely hidden within that filing system belonging to his previous mental health provider. Returning our focus to the investigation timeline, Halloween of 2012, law enforcement had intensified their focus on John's activities. Recall that he'd been discovered contradicting his testimony regarding his final encounter with Rebecca. Initially, he maintained he never saw Rebecca that morning, but later he reversed his statement claiming he did see her. Following their investigative work, authorities uncovered all those horrifying particulars of John's background: the murder convictions, the alleged stalking of his initial victim, every disturbing detail. Taking all this evidence into consideration, they now held absolute conviction that John orchestrated Rebecca's disappearance. The investigative team cleverly attempted to manipulate John into revealing Rebecca's location. Given John's documented history, what authorities had been dreading was materializing before them. The probability of discovering Rebecca alive had diminished to virtually nothing. They understood that if Rebecca had been isolated with John the day preceding her disappearance, the conclusion would have been catastrophic. Law enforcement held certainty that John had committed something horrific against Rebecca and that she had perished, which represents an absolutely heartbreaking realization to accept. Therefore, within the interrogation facility, astonishingly, John cooperated exactly as investigators hoped. Minimal pressure proved necessary, and predictably, John simply admitted everything. He confessed to ending Rebecca Gay's life. Before continuing, I must clarify that this represents John's story of events, and he hardly qualifies as someone you'd describe as fundamentally honest. Consequently, determining the actual events of that tragic evening proves extremely difficult. The only individuals who truly understand what transpired are Rebecca, who remained missing at that time, and John, who possessed extensive experience with deception and represented the complete opposite of trustworthy. According to John's statement to investigators, here's his version of what occurred on that fateful evening of October 30th, mere hours before Rebecca's beloved holiday. Throughout the evening hours of October 30th, while most people likely enjoyed Halloween-themed entertainment, John consumed alcohol excessively and viewed deeply disturbing explicit material that aligned with his perverted compulsions. Following the conclusion of his drinking, he suddenly experienced an overwhelming urge to act upon his dark desires. He selected Rebecca as his target. She represented an ideal victim from his perspective. She remained alone in her residence. She trusted him completely and regarded him with respect and admiration. He therefore entered Rebecca's mobile home late during the night and immediately struck Rebecca unconscious using a blunt instrument. Bear in mind that Conway was sleeping soundly in that same mobile home just several feet distant. Despite this fact showing absolutely no concern whatsoever, John then ended Rebecca's life. John maintained that he couldn't recall whether he committed any additional acts against her following the murder. However, do you genuinely believe that John would incriminate himself further by disclosing the most horrifying and brutal aspects of his crime? Examining his historical pattern, I personally doubt it strongly. What truly happened to Rebecca? Honestly, nobody will ever fully know. Perhaps that's ultimately preferable. Following the completion of his actions, he eliminated all incriminating evidence and transported the body merely 1 mile from her residence to a heavily forested location in a shallow depression. John then returned to Rebecca's mobile home and remained there overnight with Conway continuing to sleep undisturbed in his bedroom. Conway remained completely unaware that his mother had fought for survival just feet away, and that the person responsible still occupied the mobile home. The following morning, John awakened Conway, helped him into his Halloween outfit with his own hands, the identical hands that had taken his mother's life just hours earlier, and transported him to his paternal residence as though nothing extraordinary had occurred. The situation defies comprehension. Law enforcement, following this disturbing confession from the murderer directly, deployed a search team to the precise location John identified as Rebecca's disposal site, and they located her remains almost immediately. Rebecca Gay had been murdered by someone she considered family, practically a father figure, but in truth, he was a predator disguised as a shepherd. 55-year-old John White faced arrest and formal charges of first-degree murder in Rebecca Gay's death. When everyone, Sally especially, learned that a community minister had been taken into custody for murder, they struggled to process the information. They existed in complete shock that they had permitted someone so morally corrupt to participate in or lead their religious community, and they had shown him respect. Sally felt horrified that her fiancé was the individual who brought her own daughter to such a premature and tragic end. The same fiancé who had become more like genuine family than anything else. He had betrayed every one of them in the most devastating way imaginable. Despite John facing charges of first-degree murder, he negotiated a plea arrangement with prosecutors. His success in achieving this remains incomprehensible to me, but he eventually accepted guilt for second-degree murder and faced potential sentencing of 29 to 60 years of imprisonment, which pales in comparison to the destruction he inflicted upon the Gay family. The Gay family ultimately consented to this arrangement because it represented a preferable alternative to enduring the agonizing experience of a trial and being forced to relive the horror of Rebecca's final moments. In the final outcome, John received sentencing to a maximum of 85 years of incarceration for murdering Rebecca Gay. John displayed no emotion and remained expressionless as he heard the sentence pronounced. Meanwhile, the courtroom filled with people, Rebecca's family and friends, could not maintain their composure. They felt devastated, grief-stricken, and utterly inconsolable by the actions of an individual they had accepted like family. This sentence did provide some small measure of consolation because the prosecution, along with the general public, believed John would almost certainly never regain freedom, predominantly due to his advanced age. Everyone felt relieved and somewhat satisfied, knowing John would spend his remaining days imprisoned, existing each day contemplating his actions. Tragically, however, even this modest satisfaction was ultimately stolen from the Gay family, because on August 8th of 2013, fewer than 5 months into his 85-year sentence, John White was discovered unresponsive within his cell. He had chosen the coward's escape. He had seized the final fragment of satisfaction and any semblance of justice and closure away from Rebecca's family, one ultimate time. Upon receiving this news, Rebecca's family felt their hearts break again. However, like Rebecca, who exemplified such optimism and selflessness, they simply felt grateful that John would never inflict harm on another person ever again. Rebecca's tragedy remains profoundly heartbreaking. She was a trusting young mother who simply desired an enjoyable and uncomplicated Halloween celebration with her relatives and her son Conway. Instead, her existence was severed prematurely in a devastating sequence of events, and on her most cherished holiday. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed this documentary, please like the video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell. I'd love to hear your thoughts, so don't forget to leave a respectful comment below. Your feedback not only helps the channel grow, but also allows us to keep bringing more detailed and gripping documentaries to our audience. Your support truly makes a difference, and it's because of viewers like you that we can continue creating content that matters. Thank you again for watching, and I can't wait to see you in the next video.